Hi everyone. Thanks for stopping by. If you're new here, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to stay updated. Your support helps this channel keep digging into the strange, hidden stories of our past. Now let's dive in. Tonight we begin, not with a philosopher or a conqueror, but with a plant that's been confusing, healing, and mildly annoying governments for thousands of years: cannabis. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's smoky little history together. We are in roughly 5000 BC now, the Stone Age. Emphasis on stone. Civilization is still in beta testing. People are inventing pottery, domesticating animals, and dying of things like standing near a mosquito. Somewhere in what's now Siberia, a forager probably tossed cannabis onto a campfire for warmth, took a deep breath, and forgot why they went outside in the first place. Archaeologists later found cannabis seeds in ancient burial sites, which means someone valued this plant enough to take it to the grave, literally. Either it was a sacred ritual, or a prehistoric version of "don't bury me without my stash." Given human nature, probably both. At first, cannabis wasn't about good vibes or philosophical musings. It was about survival. The fibers made ropes and clothes. The seeds were edible, and the plant was basically nature's Swiss Army knife. You could sail with it, tie things with it, wear it, and if you accidentally smoked it, suddenly find the clouds hilarious. Imagine being one of the first humans to inhale it on purpose. No one to explain what's happening. No snacks, no Bob Marley, just raw confusion and a deep conversation with a tree that isn't talking back. Early humans probably didn't think they were getting high. They thought the gods had upgraded their vision. And yet, from that accidental puff, the legend began. A plant that would one day travel the globe, inspire poetry, trigger paranoia, and fund entire reggae albums. All starting with some bored Neolithic farmer who wanted to see what would happen if he set fire to his crops. So before the word weed even existed, cannabis had already outsmarted us. It found the one species dumb enough to cultivate it, worship it, outlaw it, and smoke it, often in the same century. Humanity. Meet your oldest love-hate relationship. Fast forward to 2700 BC, where China was inventing everything: paper, silk, bureaucracy, and, apparently, the world's first medical endorsement for getting high. Enter Emperor Shen Nong, known as the Divine Farmer, which sounds noble until you realize it means he spent most of his reign taste-testing random plants to see which ones killed him. According to legend, Shen Nong discovered hundreds of herbs this way, including cannabis. His book, the Pen Chao Ching, reads like an ancient Yelp for plants. Good for pain, gout, rheumatism, and forgetfulness, which is impressive because cannabis probably caused the forgetfulness he was treating. To Shen Nong, weed wasn't a vice, it was medicine. The Chinese didn't roll it up or pass it around. They brewed it into tonics, ground it into powders, and probably called it something wise-sounding like wind in the bones elixir. It treated fevers, calmed nerves, and made people slightly too confident about their poetry. By this point, hemp was everywhere. Spun into rope, woven into clothes, written on as paper. Entire towns were basically built out of cannabis. You could live your whole life surrounded by the same plant. Your clothes, your scrolls, your fishing nets, and if you were lucky, your mild painkiller. It was like living inside an eco-friendly bong. Doctors in ancient China took it seriously. They believed cannabis balanced the body's yin and yang, which is a polite way of saying it chills you out. It wasn't recreational yet. But let's be honest. every civilization that says it's using something for spiritual healing usually ends up giggling at shadows. So while the rest of the world was still inventing fire pits and bad decisions, China had already added cannabis to its pharmacy. Shenong might not have known what THC was, but he knew one thing. It made people stop complaining for a while. And in a world full of famine, floods, and Mongols warming up in the distance, that's what you'd call medical progress. While China was busy bottling cannabis into tonics and pretending it was strictly medicinal, their neighbors on the open grasslands of Central Asia had a simpler idea. Just burn it and breathe deeply. Meet the Scythians, the horse-riding nomads who basically lived outdoors, looked like they hadn't slept since birth, and had a collective attitude best described as armed and unbothered. Around 1000 BC, these people decided that death rituals were missing something, mainly smoke, not incense, not sage, cannabis. Greek historian Herodotus wrote that the Scythians would throw hemp seeds onto hot stones inside sealed tents. Within minutes, the place filled with thick, aromatic clouds, and then, in his words, they would howl with pleasure, which is ancient Greek for someone's about to freestyle under the stars. This wasn't some small ritual puff either. They treated it like a full-body baptism in THC. Imagine 20 warriors, all covered in tattoos and fur, crawling into a tent with burning hemp and emerging spiritually reborn, and slightly disoriented. The Scythians didn't have a word for relaxation, but this was probably the closest they got. The smoke wasn't just for fun. It helped them commune with the spirits of the dead, ease grief, and, let's be honest, make the afterlife sound like a pretty good deal. Archaeologists later uncovered golden bongs. Yes, literal gold buried in Scythian tombs, still coated with traces of cannabis residue. That's right. These ancient warriors died the way they lived, stylish, mysterious, and slightly high. You can't buy that kind of historical commitment. Hey there, my curious friends. If you're just joining in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these stories coming. Now, let's continue our trip through history, quite literally. Last time we watched the Scythians hotbox their tents like Bronze Age DJs, but cannabis was already wandering far from the steppes, riding trade routes and slipping into temples and taverns alike. What started as a plant for rope and medicine was becoming a bridge between worlds, spiritual, physical, and sometimes just chill. Our next stop, ancient India. Here, the story takes a sacred turn. In the Atharva Veda, one of the oldest Hindu scriptures, dating back over 3,000 years, cannabis is named one of the 5 sacred plants gifted by the gods. They called it bhang, and it wasn't just medicine. It was divine. The priests believed Shiva, the lord of destruction and rebirth, discovered cannabis when he wandered into the mountains, exhausted and angry. He rested beneath a tall green plant, ate its leaves, and awoke calm, blissful, enlightened. From that day, bhang became Shiva's gift to humanity. But this wasn't just myth. It was daily ritual. People mixed bhang into milk, honey, and spices to make a thick drink still consumed today during festivals like Holi. It wasn't smoked. It was sipped, shared, and sanctified. A drink for warriors before battle, for monks before meditation, and for anyone needing to feel the universe loosen its tie. India took what the Scythians treated as a party and turned it into philosophy. To them, cannabis wasn't an escape. It was insight. It quieted the ego, slowed time, and allowed mortals to peek into the machinery of the cosmos. It's almost poetic that the word nirvana and the feeling of being high describe the same mental drift. The world blurs, your heartbeat sinks with eternity, and you suddenly understand that your neighbor's goat is your spiritual equal. By 1000 BC, cannabis was everywhere along the Silk Road. Traders carried it from India into Persia and beyond. Somewhere along the way, it met Zoroastrianism, the first religion to formalize the idea of cosmic duality: light versus darkness, order versus chaos. Guess which plant they thought could help reveal truth? They called it Homa, the divine drink of wisdom. Some historians debate what Homa actually was, but cannabis fits the recipe: boiled leaves, sacred smoke, and visions that made prophets feel like they'd swallowed the sun. So while priests in Persia sipped their enlightenment, nomads still lit it up. Humanity had found a substance that united farmers, warriors, mystics, and poets, all chasing the same question: what happens when you quiet the noise inside your head? Let's fast forward again. The Greeks and Romans, famous for their wine, also knew about hemp. Though they were more into textiles than trips, they used it for ropes, sails, and bandages. Herodotus's stories about the Scythians probably made it sound like some barbarian pastime. Rome preferred things that came in amphorae, not smoke clouds. But cannabis never stayed still. It moved west, hitching rides on ships and camels, spreading into Africa, where it mingled with new rituals. By the 13th century, Sufi mystics in the Middle East began using hashish, concentrated cannabis resin, during meditation. Their goal wasn't to get high, but to get closer to God. And here's the twist. This is where cannabis first got its modern reputation as both sacred and sinful. The story goes that a Persian Sufi named Haidar discovered hashish while wandering in a garden. He tasted the leaves, felt peace wash over him, and thanked Allah for revealing such serenity. When his students saw his calm joy, they asked for the secret. Soon, word spread, and other religious authorities were horrified. How could something that made you laugh and forget your worries be holy? To them, pleasure was dangerous. The body was temptation. The mind had to remain clear. And so the Great Divide began. Some saw cannabis as a doorway to God. Others saw it as a door best left locked. Sound familiar? Meanwhile, hashish clubs flourished quietly across Persia and Egypt. Poets praised its visions. Musicians said it made the soul sing. One writer in Cairo described it as the green key that unlocks the heart. But then came the crackdown. Rulers outlawed it. Farmers hid it. Mystics defended it in whispers. And cannabis learned another ancient trick: how to survive persecution. By the time the Crusaders marched across the Middle East in the 12th century, they carried home more than war stories. In the ports of Europe, rumors spread of assassins, fanatical warriors from Persia, who supposedly smoked hashish before battle to feel no fear. It's a myth, mostly, but it gave the West a new word: hashashin. Say it slowly: hashashin. Sound familiar? That's right. It became the root of the modern word assassin. Think about that. The entire Western idea of a stealthy killer came from the legend of holy men who got high before striking for faith. History is wild like that. So by the end of the Middle Ages, cannabis had evolved into something entirely new: healer, heretic, muse, outlaw. Every culture it touched projected its own reflection onto it. To the east, it was sacred smoke. To the west, suspicious fog. But the story doesn't end in temples and tents. The next chapter takes us to colonial ports, pirate ships, and the Americas, where cannabis will change its name, its image, and its destiny. Before we sail onward, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment. When do you think the world first got high? By accident or design? Hey there, explorers of the strange and the ancient. Before we light up the next chapter of human history, do me a small favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another journey through the forgotten corners of our past. Your support keeps this channel alive and helps me keep uncovering the stories the textbooks forgot to mention. Now, let's talk about how cannabis became modern. By the 1500s, the plant had crossed oceans and borders like a restless traveler. European sailors brought it everywhere, not for pleasure, but for profit. Hemp was the backbone of naval power. Ships needed ropes, sails, nets, and strong fibers that could survive salt, storms, and time. Without hemp, there would be no empire. Spain, England, and Portugal all cultivated massive hemp farms. The irony: the same plant that made exploration possible would later be outlawed by the very nations it carried to glory. But let's rewind to the Americas, the next stage of cannabis's long, smoky saga. When colonists arrived, they brought hemp seeds with them. In 1619, the Virginia Assembly passed a law requiring every farmer to grow hemp. Not optional, mandatory. You could pay taxes with it. It was that important. Hemp ropes held up ships, hemp cloth dressed settlers, and hemp paper carried the first printed ideas of freedom. In fact, some historians argue that early drafts of the Declaration of Independence were written on hemp paper. Imagine that, the blueprint for liberty, scribbled on a cousin of the plant that would one day be criminalized for destroying society. But cannabis didn't stay just industrial for long. In Latin America, it met ancient indigenous traditions. The Spanish brought cáñamo. The locals already had their own psychoactive plants: tobacco, peyote, coca. Together, they mixed rituals and remedies into something entirely new. Across Mexico, Brazil, and the Caribbean, people began to experiment again. Smoke, medicine, or magic. Sometimes all three. Fast forward to the 1800s. The world is modernizing fast. Telegraphs, trains, electricity. Science is turning mystery into medicine. And guess who quietly enters the laboratory? Cannabis. Doctors in India and Europe start documenting its effects. In 1839, an Irish physician named William Brooke O'Shaughnessy published research on cannabis after observing its use in India. He found it relieved pain, muscle spasms, and nausea, decades before morphine or aspirin became mainstream. Thanks to him, cannabis tinctures became standard in European pharmacies. It was sold in bottles with fancy gold labels that said things like, "For migraines, melancholy, and nervous disposition." You could walk into a Victorian drugstore and buy liquid cannabis. No questions asked. Even Queen Victoria reportedly used it for menstrual pain, prescribed by her personal physician. In those years, cannabis wasn't counterculture. It was cutting-edge science. But the world was changing, and not just scientifically. The Industrial Revolution brought wealth, power, and control. Governments began classifying substances, regulating pleasure, and deciding which highs were civilized and which were savage. Then came colonial paranoia. The British in India saw locals using bhang and ganja and decided it must be a moral problem. So in 1893, they commissioned the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission report, a 1,000-page investigation into whether cannabis corrupted the population. The results shocked them. After years of research, the commission concluded it wasn't dangerous. It might even be beneficial. But politics doesn't like answers that can't be exploited. The colonial machine moved on, and the plant stayed stigmatized. Meanwhile, in the Middle East and Africa, cannabis was thriving underground. Egyptian laborers called it hashish al-fukara, the poor man's comfort. Moroccan tribes cultivated it in the Rif Mountains. Ethiopian priests burned it during Coptic rituals. In Africa, enslaved people carried seeds across the Atlantic, hiding them in braids and clothes, preserving one last link to home. And when they reached the New World, that secret took root again. In the Caribbean, enslaved Africans mixed cannabis with local herbs, calling it ganja, a word that came from India's ancient Sanskrit. Across centuries and continents, the plant's spiritual identity fused into a single culture: healing, rhythm, resistance. By the early 1900s, cannabis had found new rhythm in Jamaica. Among the poor, the outcast, the spiritual. The Rastafari movement embraced it as a holy sacrament, calling it the wisdom weed. They didn't smoke to escape. They smoked to connect, with nature, with God, with truth. But across the ocean, in America, that same plant was about to be demonized. After the Mexican Revolution, 1910-1920, thousands of immigrants came north, bringing marijuana, their traditional name for cannabis. American newspapers, fueled by racism and fear, turned the word itself into a weapon. "Marijuana makes men into beasts," screamed headlines. "The devil's weed that drives you mad." It wasn't science. It was politics and prejudice. The same hemp that had built ships and saved sailors was now branded as poison because poor immigrants and black jazz musicians used it. The hypocrisy was staggering and intentional. By 1937, the U.S. passed the Marijuana Tax Act, effectively criminalizing cannabis under the guise of taxation. Overnight, healers became criminals, fields became contraband. The plant that connected the ancient world was now condemned in the modern one. And yet, despite all the propaganda, cannabis refused to die. It went underground again, just like it had in medieval Persia, because you can't outlaw curiosity. Hey there, time travelers and truth seekers. Before we roll into this wild part of history, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and ring that little bell. It helps the channel grow and keeps these hidden stories alive. All right, take a deep breath, because now we're entering the age of smoke, fear, rebellion, and rock and roll. The 20th century, the century of contradictions. Science reached the stars, but humanity still burned witches. Only now the witches were carrying rolling papers. By the 1920s, cannabis was quietly spreading through jazz clubs in New Orleans, Harlem, and Chicago. It wasn't elite medicine anymore. It was the sound of liberation. Musicians called it gauge, tea, or muggles. Louis Armstrong loved it, saying it gave him peace, focus, and rhythm. Jazz wasn't just music. It was a rebellion against control, and weed was part of its heartbeat. But those in power didn't like anything that made people feel too free, especially if those people were poor, brown, or spoke a different language. Enter Harry Anslinger, America's first drug czar, a man with a cold smile, a loud voice, and a talent for fear-mongering. When alcohol prohibition ended in 1933, Anslinger needed a new demon to keep his department alive. He found one in cannabis. He didn't care about science. He cared about headlines, and headlines he made. Marijuana, assassin of youth. Reefer madness, the deadly menace that turns men into fiends. He filled newspapers with stories, most fake, all racist, claiming that marijuana made black men violent, Mexicans insane, and white women fall for jazz musicians. It was social engineering at its ugliest. He testified before Congress using language so wild it could have come from a horror movie. One senator asked, "Is marijuana really the most dangerous drug in America?" Anslinger replied, "Yes, it makes people think they are equal." And that, right there, was the real problem. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed. Doctors protested. Scientists objected. Nobody listened. The plant that once connected the human race now divided it. Overnight, it went from medicine to menace. But truth has a way of sneaking through the cracks. While the West waged war on weed, the East still respected it. In India, it remained a ritual. In Jamaica, a religion. In Africa, a medicine. Cannabis kept growing quietly in the corners of human consciousness, a small, green rebellion against conformity. Then came the 1960s, war, protests, music, love, and smoke. The baby boom generation rejected everything their parents stood for: authority, war, silence. Cannabis became more than a plant again. It became a symbol. When Bob Dylan handed a joint to the Beatles in 1964, it wasn't just rock gossip. It was history. Those few puffs changed pop culture forever. Woodstock, 1969. A muddy miracle of peace and haze. 500,000 people in one field, barefoot, singing, crying, high, and hopeful. While politicians warned of chaos, the crowd proved the opposite. When stoned, people weren't violent. They were kind. Governments didn't like that either. In 1970, U.S. President Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs. Cannabis was classified as Schedule I, alongside heroin. Officially, it had no medical use and a high potential for abuse. Scientists laughed. Politicians didn't. Behind closed doors, Nixon's aides admitted the truth years later. We couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or to be black. But by associating the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, we could disrupt both communities. So the war wasn't on drugs. It was on people. Throughout the 70s and 80s, millions were arrested, mostly for tiny amounts of cannabis. Families were broken, lives destroyed. But something else was happening too, the resistance. Writers, musicians, and scientists began speaking out again. Carl Sagan, the famous astronomer, wrote essays about how cannabis expanded creative thought. Doctors rediscovered its pain relief properties. Cancer patients whispered to one another that it helped with nausea when chemo made life unbearable. Slowly, quietly, the plant that had been demonized for decades began to reclaim its ancient identity: healer. By the 1990s, countries started to rethink everything. California legalized medical marijuana in 1996. Canada followed. Israel began scientific research on cannabinoids, finding that the body itself produces similar compounds. The endocannabinoid system. The irony was delicious. Humans were literally designed to interact with this plant. Meanwhile, music kept the message alive. From reggae to hip-hop, from Bob Marley to Snoop Dogg, the green leaf became a global flag of peace and rebellion. Marley said it best: "Herb is the healing of the nation," and for many, it truly was. Still, governments clung to old fears. The U.S. DEA-raided dispensaries. The UN debated prohibition. But public opinion was shifting fast. Scientists proved what ancient healers already knew. Cannabis could relieve pain, fight inflammation, calm anxiety, and even help the dying find peace. It wasn't the devil's weed. It was the misunderstood one. So, what did we learn from all this? That no matter how many laws are written, truth grows like a weed, persistent, resilient, unstoppable. Before we head into Part 5, where we'll explore the 21st century, legalization, billion-dollar industries, and the strange corporate future of this ancient plant, take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below. Do you think cannabis will ever be fully accepted, or will it always carry a shadow from its past? Hey everyone, welcome back to our journey through time and through smoke. Before we dive in, take a second to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. It helps the channel keep growing and spreading stories that most people never hear. All right, exhale, and let's step into the modern era. The age when weed went from whispers in the dark to neon lights and billion-dollar headlines. We're in the 21st century now, the era of information, contradictions, and irony. A time when you can be arrested for a joint in one state and legally buy the same thing across the border in designer packaging. But to understand this strange modern landscape, we need to rewind just a little to the 1990s. In 1996, California became the first U.S. state to legalize cannabis for medical use. Doctors argued that patients with cancer, AIDS, or chronic pain deserved access to something safer than opioids. The federal government disagreed. Hard. DEA raids, political backlash, propaganda. The same old war. But now people were watching. And for the first time, the truth had cameras on its side. Then came the internet. Information spread faster than fear. People began sharing stories, research, and, most powerfully, personal testimonies. Parents of epileptic children discovered that cannabis oil could stop seizures when nothing else worked. Veterans used it to silence PTSD nightmares. Elderly people replaced sleeping pills with gentle puffs before bed. The media couldn't ignore it anymore. Scientists started publishing real data. The word cannabinoid entered medical journals. Slowly, one headline at a time, the myth of the devil's weed began to crumble. By the 2010s, the dominoes started to fall. Colorado and Washington legalized recreational marijuana in 2012. Uruguay became the first entire country to do it. Then, Canada followed. Now, over half of the United States allows medical or recreational use. Europe, Asia, even Africa, all are rethinking their laws. But here's the twist. The plant that once symbolized rebellion is now a corporate commodity. Cannabis dispensaries look like Apple stores. CEOs wear suits, not tie-dye. Wall Street investors who once financed prohibition are now selling the product. The same governments that jailed people for possessing it are now collecting taxes from it. And that raises a haunting question. Has freedom finally won, or just been repackaged? Because while billion-dollar companies thrive, millions still carry criminal records for doing the same thing legally now. Entire communities, especially Black and Latino ones, were destroyed during the war on drugs. Legalization without justice isn't liberation. It's marketing. Still, there's hope. Activists around the world are pushing for expungement, clearing old convictions, reopening lives. In 2021, the United Nations officially removed cannabis from the list of the world's most dangerous narcotics. The same plant that once symbolized rebellion is now being researched for Alzheimer's, depression, chronic pain, even cancer. And maybe, just maybe, the story is finally coming full circle. Because here's the thing. Every civilization that touched this plant found something of itself inside it. The Scythians saw freedom. The Hindus saw divinity. The Victorians saw medicine. The hippies saw peace. And today, maybe we're starting to see balance. Cannabis has outlived empires, kings, popes, and politicians. It survived being burned, banned, demonized, and rediscovered again and again. Why? Because it's not just a drug. It's a mirror. It reflects who we are and how we deal with fear, pleasure, control, and freedom. When ancient people burned it intense, they saw gods. When scientists studied it, they saw chemistry. When governments outlawed it, they saw danger. And now, as we legalize it, we see opportunity. But maybe the real lesson isn't about money or medicine. Maybe it's about humility. That after 10,000 years, we're still learning from a plant that never needed us, but somehow kept teaching us anyway. So the next time someone rolls a joint or sips a drop of oil, or lights incense made from hemp, remember, this isn't just smoke. It's history, it's culture. It's the echo of every civilization that ever looked at the earth and wondered, what if the gods left us something to calm our minds? And perhaps they did. So, my friends, if you've enjoyed this journey, from sacred temples to Silicon Valley, from myth to medicine, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Do you think cannabis will ever truly be free? Or will it always carry the shadow of its past? Because next time, we're diving even deeper into how other ancient plants shaped our history, our consciousness, and maybe even our souls. Stay curious, stay kind, and remember, history has always been a little hazy.